All right, so quick rundown review of what we discussed last week, guys. So last week we discussed about the origins of video game consoles as we know them, with generations 1, 2, and the beginning of Gen 3. The big thing, remember I told you guys, is that for it to be a video game console, it must actually have some kind of computer processor to it. So that means it has to have a motherboard, it's got to have transistors, resistors, it has to have some kind of graphics card usually, and then you have your computer console. We talked earlier about the first generation console, the Magnavox Odyssey. We talked about the growth under the Atari 2600. And where I last left off, we were just about to talk about, and start talking about Nintendo and the beginning of Gen 3. So let's continue with that. So one thing about Nintendo that I did not talk to you guys about, which I want to really kind of reinforce, is something that happened in 1983 called the Great Video Game Crash. In 1983, video games were popular, but Atari really overestimated how popular they were. And they made millions of copies of this game called E.T. the Extraterrestrial. I'm going to show you some gameplay a little bit later, but E.T. is considered to be by many to be the worst video game ever created in the history of mankind. It is horrible, it is slow, it's not much point to it, and Atari invested millions of dollars just to get the copyrights to it, and the game ended up being garbage. Why was it garbage? Normally to design a good game, you should design it for at least 6 to 12 months. They gave Atari 6 weeks. And so what they got looks like it took 6 weeks to come out with. Now, that was just the beginning. Something else that happened, and you might notice a lot with the Pong consoles, massive oversaturation in the marketplace. People were sick of video games. They were sick of consoles. And so what happened, the video game crash of '83, is when people just kind of stopped buying video games, stopped buying consoles. Atari literally had hundreds of thousands of unopened copies of this game that they couldn't even sell. So what did they do with them? They put them in a landfill in Arizona. By the way, they have been discovered. You can still get them, and they still play and work on the Atari 2600. Now, if you're wondering, does that mean E.T. is a very valuable game? No. They made so many of it, even after destroying hundreds of thousands, there's still a crap load left. Now, this was such a big impact on the entire industry. Atari kind of survived because they had the legacy behind them. But other companies were just falling apart. And Nintendo saw what was happening in America because, now we get to Gen 3. Nintendo in Japan had what they called the Famicom system, the Family Computer Entertainment System. But again, because of this video game crash, anything related to video games or even computers was kind of seen as taboo, as, just icky, verboten. So Nintendo completely changed the name of their console to NES. And what does NES stand for? The Nintendo Entertainment System. See, the whole idea behind this, it's not just a computer. It's not just for video games. It's meant for family entertainment. It's meant to eventually replace your home TV and actually it has over time, your TV and your home entertainment system. So the Nintendo Entertainment System, not computer, not video game console, NES. So Nintendo took advantage of this. And that's also why they made their controllers look so different. Not only for packaging, but to differentiate. Remember, before this, if you guys know, it was a joystick. Just a simple stick, a little knob on top. Nintendo wanted to change it. And they're like, listen, we're not a video game. We're not a computer. This is an NES. So they introduced the directional pad, the D-pad. And now the D-pad is just standard, really, in almost every kind of controller. So Nintendo uses this as an opportunity, and '83 the market was in the gutter. '84 Nintendo begins to come out. By '85 they've now already dominated the North American market. Nintendo is at this point king of the console. And do you know why they're able to do that? Coming back to what we guys are studying in regards to technology and humanity, the common theme in all of this, guys, is evolution. Humanity evolves to survive and thrive. The consoles and the companies must also evolve if they want to survive and thrive. Society was sick of what they perceived as video games, so Nintendo had to go and make a sidestep, something that was video game adjacent, but still further enough away to catch people's attentions. And as time continues, you'll notice that's the common theme for all of these. They have to constantly grow and evolve. Evolution. So, what happens next? Nintendo basically kind of dominates this industry. And Gen 3, is what Nintendo is considered to be the golden era of gaming. I'm not saying it's the best, it's just kind of when video gaming became kind of what it is today to an extent. So a few things about Nintendo, what also made them so, oh by the way, this also is when Sega introduced their new console. It was called the Sega Master System, and Atari introduced a 7800. Now remember the video I showed you guys last week? You had the 5200, the 7800 was meant to replace that. They're all garbage. The 2600, the original, is by far their best system, and they never beat that. They try, but they never do. They're trying to be innovative, but innovation for them is just trying new things that don't work. Sega Master System was actually very good, but it came out after Nintendo. And why is that important? Most families, if they already bought one console, especially in the 80s, they're not going to buy a second one right away. Because back then, I'm going to show you, the next page has it, these cost back then $200 in the 80s, which would be about $400 to $500 today. So basically, it's kind of up there. And especially in the 80s, $400 on a kid's toy, because they didn't view consoles the way we view it today. It wasn't like, oh, I'm in college, I'm going to go play Counter-Strike with my friends, I'm going to go, and play for, no. This was for kids, they viewed it. And spending hundreds of dollars for kids was only for like maybe the holidays, maybe. So Nintendo realized that they have an advantage in this market, and they have a way of selling a lot of accessories. This is also going to be a big change. Before this, accessories in video games just didn't exist. So what I'm going to do is show you another little clip from the Angry Video Game Nerd. This one I think is slightly less profane, and it does deal with Nintendo accessories.
Got a game and a controller. That's the way it goes. But sometimes that wasn't enough. Nintendo has always come up with creative and unique ways to play games. Today, there's the Wii and the DS stylus pen. But even in the early days with the NES, they were doing the same sort of thing. Some of them were pretty awesome at the time, but others were failed experiments that made you look like a jackass. So let's take a look at some of the NES accessories. I already talked about the Power Glove. We all know it's bad, so bad. Let's start with the Zapper. Back then, we just called it the gun, because that's what it is. There's nothing more satisfying than just shooting the fuck out of things.
By the way, I'll bring one in later on. They are so tactilely awesome as well. Nintendo realized this. With all of their guns, they make this awesome little click sound when you fire it, so kids would play with the gun even when it wasn't plugged in their Nintendo, because it just looked like a cool gun. Yes.
When did that two-handed one come out? Like the one where it's also in Smash Bros. Like an ad.
Oh, you'll see. It's not about here.
Oh, okay, cool.
It was the quintessential gaming accessory. Almost every console
That's the Sega
had
Master
a
System.
version of the gun. Only problem, it doesn't work so great anymore. Depends on the game, the kind of TV you're using.
You'll address it here, but this was all made in the 80s. In the 80s, all TVs were curved screens. If you have a flat screen TV, these will not work on them anymore, because they're manufactured to only work on curved screens. If you have LCD TVs, it will not work on them. So this technology requires the old technology to work. If you don't have an old tube TV, it's not going to work. And he'll show you what happens.
On itself. I have 3 of them. The first one is completely random. Sometimes it makes its target, but most of the time it doesn't. The second one has a pattern. Every other round it goes dead. So here comes the 2 clay pigeons. I shoot them, no problem. Then the next ones come out. I can't hit them, even if I press the thing against the screen. The third zapper has the same problem, except that the pattern's swapped. What the fuck is going on? Even the alleged light bulb trick doesn't work.
The light bulb trick is that you hold that up and you shoot it at a light, because, and I'll explain how it works, This works on light technology. And you'll explain in a second. Nintendo found out that the gun can actually pick up white squares by shooting an infrared light at the screen. So when you pull the trigger, it turns the screen black for a split second, and the object you're supposed to hit turn white. So that if you hit the white part, it gets registered by the gun's laser. So to reset it, or to kind of recalibrate it, it would say shoot it at a light bulb to recalibrate it. But these guns of his are broken.
Oh, gunman. What do you gotta use your hands? That's like a baby's toy.
Back to the Future reference.
Hey, get down! That it isn't powered by the NES. It's wireless. Which
There's a two-hand one you mentioned.
That means that you gotta use 6 AA
Six
batteries.
AA
This
batteries.
fucking beast drains them in a few hours. And why is the trigger on the top? It should be down here. This is balls.
Now, the
You'd
Super
think
Nintendo's
Super
part of the next
Scope would be more
generation.
reliable than the original Zapper, but it's not. Even if I point the gun.
Now,
in
besides the
same
guns,
spot,
let me show you what else they have
bullets
here.
just snap. Nintendo had everything, but it was also available at V. Now let's look at the Miracle Piano. It's a miracle.
An officially
Check it
licensed
out.
piano
You might be
for the
thinking,
Nintendo.
wow, Nintendo had a piano? Well, yeah, Nintendo had everything.
Literally.
It was also available on other game consoles and home computers. It's got one game, which is basically a piano teaching tool. It's actually not bad.
Well, that's really all there is to say. My only complaint is that the music comes from the keyboard, which is okay, but the metronome comes from the TV, and that can be a little confusing.
Other than having standard lessons, you also get this robot game. Play the song right or the robot dies. Then there's a duck game. You gotta shoot the ducks. Oh, come on.
Yeah, I'm shooting ducks with the piano.
Next we have the Power Pad. You lay it on the floor, kind of like Twister. Let's pop in good old world-class track meet and have a race, jump hurdles, and do the long jump or triple jump. The present-day equivalent of the Power Pad is Dance Dance Revolution, and there will also be a version on the Wii.
It was meant to be a family game, but most kids I knew played it alone in their room, and that meant that if your room was upstairs, your parents would hear like all thumping and shit. They hated it. Cats and dogs would piss and shit on it. In
Yeah.
fact, just thinking about it.
But I gotta say, I had that as a kid, my friends and I did, and it was so much fun at birthday parties. It's so fun. And you work up a sweat. It's exercise. Let me skip a little bit. I'll show you one more thing here.
Fuck this.
Probably
Alright.
the stupidest thing ever invented. The speed board. What is it? It's a piece of fucking plastic. You attach your controller. You get it? In case you don't want to hold the controller with your hands, in case you enjoy playing on the floor or behind a table, then this is for you. It's embarrassing. What's the point? To put the speed at your fingers? Why in the ass would I need that? If I'm playing a game that involves having to tap the buttons like crazy, I'm probably gonna get a turbo controller like the NES Max or NES Advantage. How could they even sell such a thing? Even though it's made by a third-party company, it was actually licensed by Nintendo. It's like covering a turd in ice cream sprinkle.
Once everything's
So you get the
perfectly
idea.
organized, I'll start working on my thesis.
Next up, oh boy, the Konami.
Okay, this is the
latest-
last one I'll show you. This actually is really cool.
By saying I fucking love Konami, but this thing reeks of ass. It's essentially yet another form of the Zapper, but it's voice controlled. To shoot, you say fire, 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 fire.
It also has headphones, and it advertises on the box that you can use it for your Game Boy or Walkman. Just detach the scope module. Yeah. Wow.
By the way, Nintendo's biggest accessory was actually none of these. It actually was a robot called Rob the Robot.
Yeah.
And the Rob the Robot was created basically as a way of playing two-player games when you had no one to play two-player with. It sounds sad, but at the same time kind of cool though. Question.
Did you ever hear about that? Was it a controller on like the GameCube that was just like it was like the two sides of the controller on like two sides of a keyboard? Because there was an MMO released on the GameCube called Phantasy Star Online, but to like message people.
I have not.
Look it up.
I will.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I will.
Crazy.
All right. Now, by the way, as I sit here, Nintendo, by doing this, they are going to enter the cultural zeitgeist. They're going to have a magazine called Nintendo Power Magazine. Came out on a monthly issue. Huge bestseller. It would tell you secret tips, maps, codes for games. So that became huge for Nintendo. Clothing, my God. Hats, patches, shirts, sweats, all of that. So I'm talking about everything. They had cartoons. They had actually, Nintendo would have on Saturday mornings the Super Mario Brothers Super Show, which was another big hit for them and a lot of money. Cereals, toys, as I showed you, the third-party accessories. Nintendo just took advantage of this whole situation. Good for them. Now,
They won.
as this is happening, one thing that you should know that made Nintendo unique is their characters. Their original IP, their intellectual property. And a big reason for all of that is this man right here. He is considered in many circles to be a god. Who is he? Shigeru Miyamoto. Shigeru Miyamoto is the guy who he invented Donkey Kong. He invented Mario. He invented Zelda. He invented Kirby. He controls all Nintendo game releases from 1985 through 2022. The man is a god. And so because of him, he realized that that is what makes video games, especially for Nintendo, so unique. Do you guys know, for example, Nintendo really, really values their intellectual property. So for example, you rarely will see like Mario or Zelda outside of a Nintendo product. Question?
Two things. One, what happened that made him stop like having to?
He's in his 80s.
Oh, that makes sense. The other thing I was gonna mention was just like up until like relatively recently, they only started doing like crossovers. Like there was this game called Cadence of Hyrule. It was like a
Yes.
rhythm game that they did that had Zelda characters in it, and that's like a very recent thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I'll give you another example. Some of you might know I love to collect and buy Funko Pops. Love them.
Yeah,
Nintendo will not release a license for Funko Pops for Mario or for Zelda. They will not. They have it under tight control because it's their property, and they want to make sure it's only used. I mean, think about it, guys. And Mario's been around since 1985, so we're talking about over 33 years now. When did the Mario movie first come out? No, this year.
Yeah.
It came out this year.
Well, there was actually one that came out back in the '90s, the live action one.
That doesn't exist.
Yeah, it don't happen.
No, it does not exist. I know what you're talking about. It does
Yeah.
not exist.
Yeah.
All right. So definitely, if I were to say know any name, you should know Miyamoto. The guy is a legend. Now, Nintendo from 1985 through about 1988, for a good 4 years, they just control the whole industry. They're making hundreds of millions of dollars. Sega at this time, also a Japanese company, they want to compete. Remember, they released the Master System earlier on, and they see what Nintendo is doing. And so what they're going to do is that in 1988, Sega introduced a new video game console. This will now be the beginning of what's going to be called Gen 4. So remember, Gen 1, Man-in-the-Box Odyssey. Gen 2, Atari 2600. Gen 3, Nintendo Domination. Gen 4, we get the Sega Genesis. And with Sega, what they wanted to do is that they wanted to differentiate just how much more advanced they were than Nintendo. So to begin with, let me show you a couple of old Sega commercials from 1988 on how they would differentiate themselves. All right, the first one is their catchphrase, which is Sega does what Nintendo don't.
16-bit arcade graphics. 16-bit sports action. Get Joe Montana free, Pat Riley free, Buster Douglas free, Super Monaco GP free, or Collins free. What Nintendo don't.
Now, at the beginning, Genesis is focusing on what they have, which is superior technology. 16 bits instead of 8 bits. better video card, faster processor. They're focusing on the computer elements of what makes their console better than Nintendo's. Yes?
Remember blast processing?
That's actually the first one I'm going to show you right now.
Oh, okay. Dude, complete BS.
Oh yeah, but still, it's amazing though.
Yeah.
Here's the deal.
Has blast processing. Super Nintendo doesn't. So what's blast processing do? And what if you don't have blast processing?
Now, Nintendo, blast processing, like you said, doesn't exist. It's not a thing. But they're trying to even more so differentiate themselves. You'll notice actually a lot in econ as well. And econ is what's called monopolistic competition, where you try to differentiate your product to make it at least seem different than your other competition, even if it's not. In the 1950s, for example, cigarette companies would do things like, we roast our leaves, as a way of making themselves seem special, even though they all do that. Here, they say we have blast processing, which doesn't exist, but they want to see themselves different from Nintendo. So they're kind of doing this. But what people saw in this commercial more than anything else, if you notice between the two commercials, this commercial I showed you had something the first one didn't have. Original intellectual property. Did you guys catch what Sega had there?
Sonic. It said Mario.
Sonic.
Yeah.
Sonic. And Sonic ends up being what will help build Sega Genesis. That's actually what they discovered over time. What a surprise. What makes a successful console is proprietary games. What makes Nintendo unique and great is that you can only play Mario and Zelda on it. If you want to play Mario or anything else like that, if you want to play Call of the Wild, you got to get a Nintendo. If you want to play Halo, you got to get an Xbox. If you want to play Sonic, you got to get a Sega. That's how it was. And so that's actually what they realized is the key to successful consoles. Individual proprietary games that no one else can have access to. So, Nintendo now has the competition, as I said, this commercial. Go back to the PowerPoint there. So in '88, the Sega Genesis is introduced. And as I said, it is better in terms of technology. Faster processor, better graphics, better speed, and new technology like Sonic the Hedgehog. And so as a result, this kind of sparks a new level. Nintendo is not going to fall behind on the wayside. They're going to continue competing. In fact, what happens now, guys, is that we basically are going to have an arms race when it comes to video games. So for the next 3 years, from 1988 through 1991, Sega becomes the dominant console. Nintendo is still a very close second, but Sega is the one dominating. And during this time, they also are kind of, expanding in new different areas. If you ever know a Sega Genesis, they came out with an edition called the 32X, which enables you to put a peripheral add-on on top, which then lets you play 32-bit games instead of 16-bit games. So more advanced graphics. Now, at this point, we have new consoles. I mentioned, for example, here the NEC TurboGrafx or the SNK Neo Geo. The SNK Neo Geo was amazing. It had like 50 different games on it, but it cost in the 80s and 90s $600. So it was really expensive. Usually only saw Neo Geos in the arcades. Very few private people actually owned them. Yes?
Did you own a Neo Geo?
I did not own a Neo Geo.
I was going to mention that also, I don't think they make consoles anymore. They only really make games and stuff, SNK.
Was that?
They don't make consoles anymore. They just make...
No, they don't. No, same with Sega, by the way.
Yeah.
Sega no longer makes consoles. After the Sega collapsed in the console market, they focused only on software, only on games.
One more thing. Also, mainly why they only see like SNK stuff in arcades because they mainly make fighting games like Fighters, Fatal Fury. Like,
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. So Nintendo and Sega are now the dominant companies, and technology is what's actually limiting them. In Nintendo and in Sega and in TurboGrafx, games were on cartridges. This is a cartridge with a small little motherboard, a small little board inside, and you would stick into the machine and it would read the cartridge. Cartridges, by definition, have limited space. It's like using a floppy disk. Well, in the early 90s, we have a new creation. CDs, compact discs. And the compact disc enables you to hold a hell of a lot more data. You see evolution in play here, guys? So now we're going from the cartridge to the compact disc. And this is going to change video gaming completely. In fact, today, they're not compact discs, they're video game discs. But whether you buy a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox, they're now only on discs. That's all they use now. And it began in this time period. So what I'm saying here is that, so at this time, because it's obvious that the console market was alive and well, the market crash of '83 is completely gone, and now we have a technological arms race happening. So, Sega will continue to be innovative. And they bring out their first Sega CD, and then later on Sega Saturn, and it works pretty well. Although the Sega Saturn was not perfect, it was the first major disc-based console in America. Nintendo at this time also wants to get into the action. By the way, it's during this time that Nintendo is considering a CD-based console, and they decide to just abandon that. And they instead will focus on what becomes the Super Nintendo. And the Super Nintendo is still cartridge-based. Now, Nintendo was working with Sony at this time to compete against Sega. Sony, of course, primarily in TVs, stereos, home electronics. They had not yet entered the video game industry at all. But they were great when it comes to CDs and especially lasers that could read CDs. So Sony was working with Nintendo to create a CD-based system. After some time together, Nintendo said, nah, it's too much work, it's too different for us, we're going to abandon it, thank you PlayStation, see you later. PlayStation had all this work they did that they didn't want to go to waste. So they took a risk, and Sony is then going to unleash their video game console, the Sony PlayStation. This, by the way, is not going to happen until about 1997, 1998, and the Sony PlayStation is, once again, revolutionary because of the quality of the graphics, the images, the games. And Sony learned off the bat that, again, proprietary games and proprietary characters are what sell consoles. So for Sony, they began to create things like Metal Gear Solid. They took it from Nintendo, redid it for their system, and then took over the proprietary rights for it. Another example, which I think working really well, a character you may or may not have heard of, named Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot ended up being a big kind of Mario-esque character for PlayStation. So that's how they built their process, built their company. Yes?
Oh, so along with like Metal Gear, they also took Final Fantasy and started doing it on Sony.
You're absolutely correct.
Also,
yes.
Also, neat tidbit, FF7 was originally supposed to be on the N64, but like Square Enix wanted to, Squaresoft at the time, wanted to just like do a lot more with it, so they put it onto the PS1 instead.
Yes. Because the PS1 had the capability of doing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, just so you guys know, Nintendo will eventually enter gaming with what's called the GameCube, disc gaming. But the GameCube is not going to enter until probably around Generation 6, toward the end of Generation 5. Now, if you've ever seen a GameCube, people kind of view it as a little kid's console. I loved my GameCube. It actually had some amazing graphics. Resident Evil 4 came out on the GameCube before anything else. And that's not a kid's game. That's pretty hardcore and pretty scary. So at this point, guys, we're in the late 90s. Nintendo, still dominant. Sega is losing some of their clout, but they're still in the market. Sony has entered the industry as a new player, a new competitor. What you don't have anymore are these smaller third-party companies. Neo Geo is focusing on arcades. TurboGrafx has left the industry completely. Mattel and ColecoVision, they're completely gone. They're just focusing on kids' toys. So by the end of Generation 5, we have where we are today. There's only one difference left. It's primarily dominated almost exclusively by Asian companies. So what's going to happen is by Gen 7, we're going to have a North American company enter the mix as well. From Seattle, Washington, we have Bill Gates' little baby, the Xbox. Now this and everything else comes after this, I want to hold off on because I have a whole simple lecture planned on disc-based gaming and as well as portable consoles. But in essence, this is where it leads off for the end of the 20th century and for the end of Gen 5, Gen 6. So what I want to do now is give you a few minutes, because we didn't have time last time, so we have at least 10 minutes now, where I'm actually going to have two of you play at a time to see what the SNES was like. Because Nintendo also realized that two-player and multiplayer games is really where more action and more fun is at. So let me show you what I mean by this. Let me get this set up. By the way, for the notes, do you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns? Yes?
Is the Sega Saturn part of Gen 5?
Sega Saturn is part of Gen 5, yes. Yes. All right. So let me get this set up here real quick. Let me give you a little bit of history here as well. Mario, the first Mario, was a massive success. Now, Mario 1 was a huge success. Back on the NES, they had Mario 2 as well. Something I didn't tell you guys was that Mario 2 is actually not a Mario game. Mario 2 is actually a completely different character, but Mario 1 was so successful, Nintendo was like, we need a sequel and we need it now. So they took some other game they had, recoded it to make the main character look like Mario, and then released it as Mario 2. It was never meant to be Mario 2. There actually is a Mario 2 that was released later on as Mario 2 The Lost Levels. But bringing in Mario 2 brought in a whole new characters which they hadn't had before. Do you guys know what a Shy Guy is in Mario?
Yeah.
That didn't exist until Mario 2. The Shy Guy's a pretty big character, right? So when they realized, we have a lot of characters we can work with. How about we take these characters and incorporate them into new things? Now before we had Smash Brothers, the big collaboration, Mario Kart. Mario Kart was the first major collaboration between different property they had onto one game. What's the challenge me?
Pete,
Come on up.
too slow.
Good luck, man.
Cheers. Oh yeah. Move. Gas brake. Yeah. Charges. And yes, checking out the characters you have in the first Mario Kart: Mario, Peach, Koopa, Turtle, Luigi, Yoshi. Anyone know who this is?
Donkey Kong Jr.
Donkey Kong Jr. You can tell because of the white shirt.
I have some shit.
And of course, Toad. Alright, I just play as. Actually, I'm going to play as Mario. Alright. So, I believe B is gas, right? Yeah. No, A is gas. A is brake, B is gas. Alright, here we go.
What's the song? Oh,
Did you hear it?
no. I don't have anything. Oh. No! Those sucks. I mean, after that. No! This is unfair.
Almost at 42, yeah.
How do they drop the banana peel?
A.
Get it
modern games, very pixelated, right? But you also notice something else, how much more smoother the action was compared to the original Mario games. So they're improving where they can. Question.
Did they have drifting in this?
Did they have drifting?
Yeah, did they have drifting in this one?
Slightly, yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Control, you have to like move.
So definitely Mario Kart was a big one. Now, in addition to that,
Earthbound.
this was also a huge success. Nintendo realized that racing games made a lot of money for them. And you may not know this one, it's a shame because it's so huge. It was called F-Zero. F-Zero is again another private game that Nintendo made, which kind of made them unique and singular. Let me show you what it looks like here. Grand Prix mode. Alright. Who's to play? Miss Fine students, come on up. It's your lessons.
What are you guys?
Now we have the original Nintendo to play or the NES. What do you want to try? Two different consoles. This is from 85 to 88 and 91, 95. All right.
They broke it. Only see was over there.
Yeah. All right. So remember, this is again Nintendo's what generation, guys? NES is
Third.
Gen 3. This is Gen 3. Remember, Magnavox Odyssey Gen 1, Atari Gen 2, Nintendo Gen 3. You sure Mega Man? We're gonna try it. Go for it. 88. I was 7 years old when this came out. You also notice the big difference now. Video games that Nintendo created have backstories, have stories. It's not just win, get points. They want to immerse you in what's happening. Start. Start again. I will start with either Bubble Man or Wood Man. And the music makes these games so much. Now, you never played it before, right, Mega Man? No. How intuitive are the controllers on the game? Yeah, I mean, you knew how to go down right away. Oh. Hey, first time ever. Come on. Anyone else want to try it? I do have Street Fighter on it. Yeah. I'm going to find students first, okay? Now, Street Fighter it was not created by Nintendo,
By Capcom.
but they did have it on their console. Capcom created it, and they of course did have it, and it was a huge hit on the SNES.
Nice, like, took it off stage, so like, through their like shoving it from a door. Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah. What's your? It wasn't working. Because it said that it was registered to your.
I'm always chunky.
Oh my god, Carey. I love Sunny. She's so sweet. Look at her like. Huh? No.
Oh!
All right, next.
Damn. You go.
No, it's best of two. Best of two.
Yeah, you're saying like yeah. Your point. Yeah. It was a wise decision.
What?
I mean, she's also very good in this game. I do actually.
Oh my god.
Shit, my hair's like doing
You guys want to try?
Yes.
Go for it. Can you guys appreciate also how much fun you guys are having an intensity over a console that right now is over 30 years old? Alright, hit start. Pick your character.
Yeah. So slay.
That's her right there.
The quarter circle is.
Oh my god.
Jump, you gotta hold one up. Who was Zangi?
I was thinking, how do I grab? How do I grab?
That's not
I'll be the short guy. I can't grab.
Good battle.
Dude, where's the grab?
This is not the same.
Yeah. Alright. One more round of the different game.
Aaron, you got this. Aaron, do it for all of us.
This is for you, Steve. Japan.
Yeah. That's it.
One thing that everyone does is spam A.
He called that perfect.
Oh my god.
Oh! Almost perfect. Alright, I'll get perfect this time.
Thank you, Slime. Nice to see you. Thank you.